Hello, everyone. Welcome back to this week's Cedarville Stories Podcast. I'm Mark Weinstein, and today on the program, you're in for a special treat because I am talking with Randall Wenger, Chief Counsel at the Pennsylvania Family Institute, a nonprofit organization that advances pro-life and religious freedom practices. In this role, he has represented at least a couple of cases involving religious liberty before the United States Supreme Court. In addition, Randy and his wife Tina are proud Cedarville parents, and I look forward to hearing Randy's views about Cedarville today on the program. So let's go to my conversation with Randall Wenger on this week's Cedarville Stories Podcast. Hey, Randy, welcome to today's podcast. It's great to have you on. I look forward to seeing where the Lord leads this conversation. But I wanted to start at the beginning and set the reference that, so your two daughters, Phoebe and Kimie, have both either attended here or graduated from here. Phoebe's a sophomore, but you didn't come to Cedarville. You chose a different route. You went to University of Chicago and then University of Pennsylvania School of Law. So as a parent, when you look at your daughter's education and experiences, what thoughts come to mind?
We love the school. And one of the best things about the school is the fact that my daughters love it. They are growing. Kimie grew spiritually here. My daughter Phoebe is as well. And it's been such a good experience that Alec, my 17-year-old, is looking to enroll here in a year. He'd like to study cybersecurity. And even my 10-year-old says when she gets old enough, she wants to go to Cedarville. So it has been a tremendous and nurturing experience.
That's good to hear on many fronts, but I'm interested, you talked about Kimie growing in her faith, Phoebe as well in her first year. How have you seen that as a parent?
Well, when I hear Phoebe talking about conversations that she has with her friends on spiritual matters, these are different conversations than I would have had with my friends at the University of Chicago, and certainly different than at Penn Law School.
Yeah.
Where I think there's something that's happening from the very top down that percolates everywhere through the school. So when you have the kind of intentionality that Dr. White has, where you've got the head of a university who's spending his time in chapel services, helping to invest right there as sort of the most important underlying aspect of an institution. But we've seen it in the classrooms as well. And
right.
If you're talking about the nurturing atmosphere, professors praying, professors really caring about their life in a significant way. So it's a holistically built Christian experience that's designed to educate the entire person spiritually as
right.
well, which is one thing that seems to be missing in most people's education. You go to a public school, all of your 12 years up until you get to this point, which is most people's experience. And you've learned about a world that doesn't include God at all.
Correct.
And then you get the opposite at Cedarville, where there's an intentionality to try to connect all the pieces back to the sovereign of the universe.
Yeah. So, you mentioned like how Dr. White's intentionality trickles down to faculty, staff, and students. And that's correct. How did Phoebe and Kimie's faith get trickled down to you? Where were your values shaped? Tell me your spiritual story there.
Yeah, I grew up in a Christian home, and so both mother and father who loved the Lord and had that instilled in me young. And it was great. I grew up Mennonite. We're not Mennonite anymore, but evangelicals at a fairly non-denominational church at this point. But really got a sense of we are people who have been called out by God. And growing up Mennonite and spending a summer traveling to the places in Europe where my forefathers suffered and died for their faith, gave a pretty clear view that we are called out to be separate in the world, and we can expect suffering, and we have an identity that's first and foremost in Christ, and that shapes everything else and gives a real purpose then to life as well.
You're absolutely right. And I don't know your daughters, but hearing you talk about your daughters tells me that you and your wife did a great job of leading them personally and spiritually. Let me pivot a little bit to law, and we'll probably spend a lot of time talking about law now. So was there a moment in your life, a pivotal moment, where you got really interested in legal matters? How did your interest in law develop?
I guess there's some vignettes early on in my life where I was trying to talk to my dad during the national anthem, and he said, "Look, this isn't as important as prayer, but you're supposed to have some level of respect here. So knock it off and let's talk later." And it helped instill something in me. Another vignette with my sister and her boyfriend at the time, who was complaining about the United States, and my dad, who just looked at him and said, "Look, if you see any problems here, go try to fix the problems, but don't ever complain about the country."
Mm.
And so there were these pieces that were built in my life in terms of America is a very special place that we need to steward. And so it built in me a love of learning about our country and about public policy and the things that work and the things that don't work, and trying to go a whole lot deeper than surface level. And it caused me to think, maybe there's some future in my life in public policy, but I didn't really know public policy or business. So I got a degree in economics, and it allowed me to go either way. So I didn't know whether I wanted to go to law school or try to get an MBA. And after listening to a radio program, the podcasts of the day, I guess you would say,
yeah, right,
talking religious liberty, that's for me. I could do religious liberty litigation, and that's what then sent me to law school. Probably the only person at Penn Law School who was going there to try to do religious liberty public policy work of this sort.
It's too bad our country has strayed so far that we actually need that kind of work, right? But it is an important work, and we appreciate you and everyone else who defends religious liberty. I mean, I know Cedarville can be attacked because of our position and our beliefs, and so thank you for your service. When you think about your career, even now, it sounds like your dad was a big role model for you. Who else has really impacted your life to help you in this role as a career?
Yeah, Michael Geer, who's the president of the Pennsylvania Family Institute, working with him for the past 20 years, I've watched somebody who listens to the Holy Spirit and has been able to navigate around really difficult things in a sphere where we're dealing with policy issues, both on the legal side of things and lobbying the state legislature and working with others and on the local level. There are a lot of problems out there that we could run into talking to the media and others.
Yeah.
And yet I hear him waiting on the Lord, and there's a piece about his process, and he'll work through things. And I just get this sense of, wow, God is really at work here. And it's something that I want to be around in the extent to which I can, be not listening to my just natural voice, which is work really hard and figure it out and push through anything, which can be a good intuition, but it's only an intuition. And what I really need is the power of God at work. And I've seen that exemplified for the past 20 years in one of the men that I'm working with, and really appreciate that.
When did you see this need to defend religious liberty really escalate? Because it seems like it's on a high trajectory right now, that we're always under attack.
Yeah, it's been something that's been increasing, but it certainly has been in place. it's been increasingly a problem even from the 1990s. So
Okay.
there was a case in the early 1990s called Employment Division versus Smith. And that was a case where even our heroic conservative friends in the Supreme Court really went the wrong way when it came to religious liberty and cut back the protections that we had historically understood that the Constitution afforded religious liberty. And it was a wake-up call, one that was actually shared on both sides of the aisle, so that I think almost unanimously, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act passed through Congress and was signed into law by Bill Clinton. But the concern, there's a less concern when everybody agrees that religious liberty is a shared principle.
Hmm.
And that was the case in the 1990s when it's almost unanimous, and you've got a Democratic president who's signing this into law. Is a very different thing when religious liberty is viewed as a partisan issue.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm much more concerned about religious liberty at this point because it's viewed as something that's cheap, and it's viewed as something that's partisan, and it's viewed as something where people are trying to manipulate it for their own ends rather than a guiding principle.
Yeah.
And so when I talk to the media, I try to analogize it first to freedom of speech, where the issue isn't whether you agree with me on the religious issue in the same way that the issue isn't whether you agree with me on freedom of speech, my speech or your speech,
Sure.
but everybody loses out. If your speech isn't protected, I lose out. If my speech isn't protected, you lose out. But it's even bigger than that. And I think the fact that it's the very first right and the very first amendment to the Constitution isn't just a linguistic
Hmm.
phenomenon. I think it's because it really is the firewall against everything else. Because if government can force people to violate their most deeply held convictions, there's no firewall then against the
No.
rest of our rights.
No.
Because at that point, if we're going to give in on the things that we care about the most and either not live according to our faith or go live out in somewhere in the wilderness where we don't have to, the Benedict option, where we don't have to take part in modern life, that's not good. And that's not good for America, and that's not good for freedom. And when I explain that way, even to people who don't agree with the underlying religious principles that I may be fighting for, they kind of understand that, oh yeah, I guess our freedoms do walk in groups. They don't walk singularly.
Hmm.
And if you knock some of them out, the rest of them begin to totter as well.
Yeah. Is it more difficult to defend religious liberties today because of the partisanship than ever before? Or how do you navigate that whole process?
Well, so there's one sense in which it's a whole lot easier. So we've had a whole series of wins over
Yeah.
the past years, with some really good groups out there that are working hard for religious liberty. And we have a Supreme Court that is sympathetic to religious liberty. So in that sense, you would say that the environment is really good.
Okay.
But there's another sense in which I am seeing problems multiplying on a logarithmic level that I didn't see previously. And while we don't have the religious liberty problems coming on a federal level right now, and in fact, we have federal agency heads that are helping to fix problems that we had previously. And I can tell you an example of that if you're interested.
Sure.
But now on the state level, we're running into problems in a blue state like Pennsylvania, where we've got an administration here in Pennsylvania that is either callous to religious liberty in certain matters, or hostile to religious liberty, or hostile to what goes along with Christianity. And so our beliefs, our Christian beliefs about human sexuality and marriage
Sure.
and gender don't necessarily dovetail well with a progressive view of reality. And so we'll run into that frequently when we're dealing with things here on the state level in Pennsylvania.
So do you have an example of running into that in PA?
Yeah. So I recently represented a preschool that was being told by the state that it needed to eliminate anything religious. And this was a preschool that wasn't hiding its Christianity. And in fact, Christianity was right in the name of that preschool.
Okay.
And we're very clear to the state for years and years and years what they were doing. And yet the state wanted them to get rid of anything that was religious because it was treating religion like asbestos, like poison that needs to be remediated, versus, hey, we live in a diverse society and some free schools are going to be religious and some aren't, and that's America, and that works for everybody. But instead trying to create this boring, plain vanilla that takes out the dimensions that actually make America great and the Christianity that really builds that vibrancy into the culture, including the virtues that help make things work.
So another case that in my research, I know you worked on, that's the Conestoga Wood Specialties Corporation v. Burwell, which was tied closely to the Burwell versus Hobby Lobby. Both cases were litigated at before the Supreme Court. What lessons did you learn from that time on the Conestoga case that you can share in this podcast?
Oh boy, there were lots of lessons. So to be clear about what happened there, the Obama administration came up with an abortifacient mandate as part of the Affordable Care Act, as part of Obamacare, requiring most employers to provide drugs and devices that could result in an abortion.
Right.
And so there were then a number of religious employers, and by religious employers, I mean marketplace employers, but the owners, the operators were Christians.
Okay.
So when I first heard about this mandate, one of the lessons that I learned was I thought that when the Obama administration began to experience the pushback on this issue, that they would say, "Oh, whoops, we didn't mean to violate the religious conscience of millions upon millions of Americans. Whoops, there are other ways that we can accomplish our ends," which would be really easy to do when you're the federal government and you've got tons of money and you want to make sure that everybody has every conceivable form of contraception, including abortifacient contraception. You can just pay for it. And after all, it's not that expensive in the scheme of things, which was part of the argument that the government was seeming to try to make. But instead, they wanted to force employers to pay for this, including employers who were believers. That was a real problem for Conestoga Wood and the owners who were plain Mennonites in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. They had about 1,000 employees, and their fines, if they didn't go along with this, were going to be something like $32 million a year, and it would just be a fraction of that if they just got rid of their insurance plans altogether. And so if you thought about what was going on here, it wasn't about trying to get everybody insured. It was about doing everything exactly the way the government wanted you to do it. Because if you just got rid of your healthcare plan, okay, we'll just fine you a little bit. But if you want a really good Cadillac healthcare plan, but you don't want to do the pieces that offend your conscience, we're going to drive you out of business, which is essentially what would have happened to this family. So we sought a temporary restraining order, which is an emergency injunction,
correct,
in federal court, because we argued that, look, employers have religious liberty in the way that they run their business, and this violates the sincerely held religious beliefs as an employer. This can't be hard. And we won the TRO, and I thought, okay, this is great. This portends well for the future, and we're gonna win this thing. And so I wrote my press release for my expected win, um, for the preliminary injunction, which was the next step, and I lost it. And then I wrote the press release for the expected win before the Court of Appeals in an emergency appeal, and we lost it. And I began to think this is going to be a whole lot harder than I initially thought. So it took 3 tries before the U.S. Court of Appeals, and our only option left was the U.S. Supreme Court. So we filed the paperwork to the cert petition and filed the same day that Hobby Lobby did.
Okay.
Well, actually, Hobby Lobby didn't appeal. The government appealed because Hobby Lobby won at the Court of Appeals. We lost at the Court of Appeals.
Okay.
And both of those were filed the same day, and the court granted cert on both cases and then consolidated them for the appeal. And I like to remind everyone that if they read the opinion, Justice Alito talked about our clients before Hobby Lobby clients. Yeah, Hobby Lobby is great, and their leaders are great as well. But there was something unique about my clients being plain Mennonite that I think was it got past a lot of the blur and fuzz that's out there when the world tries to say, "Oh, you're just trying to get something special,"
Right.
and you're not trying to play by the rules that everybody else plays by. But when you see somebody who dresses differently and lives differently in various areas of life, people automatically think, okay, this person actually is religious. Maybe we should give them a break. And I think it was helpful in terms of optics to have the plain Mennonite Hans as part of this effort so that people could see, oh, this isn't people trying to game the system. And it's important to have that optic because most people don't know the Greens well enough to know what good people they are.
Right.
And that's why a lot of these religious liberty cases that are won are cases involving the Amish or the Mennonites or nuns, or in the case of Mahmoud versus Taylor, a religious liberty case that came down this term, it was a Muslim family. And those optics often help people understand the principle.
Yeah.
And you said the arguments get missed.
How important was it for the Supreme Court, or in your perspective, for the Supreme Court to connect the Burwell case with the Hobby Lobby case? Did that really, when that happened, did you think, okay, we're going to win this?
When the Supreme Court granted cert,
Yeah.
I was hopeful. I was hopeful that we were going to get a good result. The Supreme Court wasn't as conservative at that point. So we weren't sure where it was going to go because the losses that we kept having along the way were the court saying, yeah, there is such a thing as religious liberty, but if you've chosen to incorporate, if you're acting through a corporation, then all bets are off because this is an individual liberty, not a corporate liberty. And it seemed to be, in my thinking, to be really shallow in terms of what religious liberty really means, because a corporation doesn't lie awake at night wondering how to pay its employees if it's going through hard times, but the owner does. The owner and the operator are the ones who are trying to think through how can they take care and shepherd their corporation and its employees and serve their customers well. And they're the ones who end up worrying and praying and trying to figure out how to live their lives in a way that's consistent with their faith, not an abstract corporation. And the right needed to be there. So Justice Alito said, yes, that right belongs to the owner of the corporation. And that this particular Obama era regulation violated religious liberties. So a wonderful win both for Hobby Lobby and for Conestoga.
And when that happened, what year was that, first of all?
That was 11 years ago.
Now you've also, I don't know when you represented Gerald Groff. He's a postal worker from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. He's the guy who refused or didn't want to work on Sundays because of his religious beliefs. You represented him. How different was that case, or was that really a similar kind of case?
Well, that was a really interesting case as well. And I think it's important for people to understand who Gerald Groff was. So I'm just going to digress
Please.
a second. People can understand
Sure.
understand the importance of religious liberty. So Gerald had been in the mission field. He came back to America. He wanted to get a job where he could live out his faith, and he knew he didn't want to work Sundays because of his belief
Right.
that Sundays are Resurrection Day, as the way that he would describe it. And that's what makes this day really special. And that's why we don't want to work on this day. So post office, it's great. They don't deliver packages on Sundays. So it was a perfect job for him until Amazon came around. When Amazon came around, he worked out a solution with his employer to say, I will work everybody's holidays. So vacation days, the holidays other people don't want to work. I'll work Saturdays every Saturday. I'll work more than one shift per day. I will do everything that you need. I will be the model employee. I just can't work Sundays. Can we work something out? And they said yes, until they worked out a new union contract and then said, no, we're not going to do this for you anymore. So they proved that they could do it, and then they backed off and didn't do it. So the issue in that case was federal civil rights law that said that employers are supposed to accommodate religious employees so that religious employees can stay in the workplace. And there was a 50-year-old precedent that said, yeah, despite what Congress said, if it's any problem whatsoever, any problem, even the smallest problem for the employer, you don't have to do it, which took the entire, it just took the heart out of this provision in the Civil Rights Act.
Right.
And what we wanted to do in our allies, like First Liberty Institute, we wanted to get the heart put back into that law again to help religious employees in the workplace, because we were seeing all over the place with the phone calls that we were getting that religious liberty, the ability to live out your faith in the workplace, was an increasing problem. And so getting that win there for Gerald Groff was great, to be able to help out others.
Now, I want to ask you a two-part question. So on both cases, Conestoga and Gerald Groff. So the final decision by the Supreme Court, how big a win was it? What was the final tally? And then how have you seen these cases impact today's living for Americans across the country?
Yeah. So the Conestoga Wood Hobby Lobby decision, it was a much more narrow decision by the court. It was a good decision. It was solid, but it was narrow in terms of numbers. So it could have flipped either direction.
And at that point, you didn't have a conservative Supreme Court, right?
No,
Okay.
we didn't.
So that's a big win.
So that was more nerve-wracking.
Sure.
So until we saw that it was Justice Alito delivering the opinion, who is the religious liberty champion, there was suddenly okay, this is going to be good, even before we read the opinion. And so it's been cited multiple times for the proposition that you can exercise religious belief in the way you run a business. So that has been tremendous. The Groff decision has been cited hundreds and hundreds of times just in the 2 years since that decision, because we run into those issues more than we do the Hobby Lobby kinds of problems. And so it's been cited over and over and over again beneficially to religious employees in the workplace. And that was unanimous, by the way. The Gerald Groff decision was a 9-0 decision.
How rare is that? Because it has to be really rare.
It is. It's less rare than you would think across the board, but when it comes to these cultural issues, yes, it is rare. But it was sort of a reminder to me that yes, we still share some values here in America, and religious liberties is still one of those values that we do share as Americans.
Yeah.
At least in some circles, the Supreme Court respects religious liberty, and that was a very good thing.
So was winning, regardless of the margin, meaningful, or was it even more meaningful that it was a total 9-0 win?
It's always meaningful to win.
Yeah, right.
Right. It's meaningful to win. You don't have to blow it out of the park, but I think the 9-0 decision has made it a whole lot easier when we're going back and pointing this out in other settings to say, look, there's such a breadth of understanding of how important this is,
Yeah.
that you can't shortchange religious liberty in this setting. And so we have used it already to our benefit in the cases that we've worked on.
Good. Let me wrap up today's program with really two final questions. When you think about your role and the high honor and great responsibility it is to represent a client before the Supreme Court, what does that mean to you? How do you approach that with the reverence and awe that it respects, that is due it?
Yeah, there is so much going on representing any client, but so much more when it's at the Supreme Court, where there are principles that we're fighting for, and there's an individual that may be suffering as they're watching what's going on and trying to understand what's happening, and particularly to go before the Supreme Court. I think it's helpful for those clients to be able to see that they are heard and have the process interpreted to them, because they're individuals who are trying to figure out how to make this work. But then it's so important to put the kind of time, the kind of resources of not just briefing an issue and arguing an issue, but getting everybody around you to understand how important an issue it is. So to get friend of the court briefs, amicus briefs from various parties coming in, to get the media to understand these issues. Because if you can win for a client in court, that's great for that client. If you can win for that client in the courtroom of public opinion as well,
right?
So that others can begin to say, oh, this is a shared value. So as I was flying home after the decision came down, and talking to somebody who was sitting next to me at a restaurant, trying to explain to them the value of this Supreme Court case that just came down, it was just kind of a microcosm of the larger thing that we were trying to do during the time period of, let's win it in every respect. Let's win it in the newspapers, and let's win it for the client, and let's win it in a way that honors God. And so in everything that we're trying to do, we may fight really hard, but we're going to fight in a way that represents the truth and the honesty of Jesus Christ, because no matter how important these issues are, there is a Holy Spirit way to do this work. And we're only going to be successful if God is the one who can get credit at the end of the day. I really enjoyed Gerald Groff in the way that he was able to tell his story to the media as we were driving around southern Lancaster County in his mail route. And he was talking to some really high-placed people in American media. And the story he would tell would always come back to, and the reason that I can't work on Sundays is because it's Resurrection Day. It's the day that we celebrate Jesus rising from the dead after he died on the cross for our sins. He would manage to get the gospel in there in every conversation, because it was just who he was.
Yeah.
And he did it with a smile, and just it was kind of the beauty of the best of America, where you've got people from all kinds of backgrounds, but he was able to share his story with the gospel, and do so with Holy Spirit grace that I really appreciated.
That's a fabulous story. And that's a win all right there. To anytime you can advance the gospel in real life, boy, nothing's better than that. That's great.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because I don't know the answer to this question. I'm probably more of a novice legal person, but so when the decision's coming down from the Supreme Court, are the teams, the legal teams, are they in the courtroom when that comes down, or where are you when you get these verdicts, these decisions?
Oh, that is such a funny question, because it's not what people would expect at all. I was sitting in a conference room with the legal team and the client and computers, and we were there looking at the SCOTUS blog, waiting for the decisions to come down.
Okay.
In the very first place that you can see it come down is SCOTUS blog, and then you click on it, you get the decision, and they'll tell you who the author of the opinion is, so that when we had the Hobby Lobby decision come down and seeing it was Alito was that moment of,
Yeah.
and then here with the Groff case, okay, we won, but how did we win? And beginning to quickly read through the opinion, because we knew that immediately we were going to go into the media mode of getting in front of cameras. And what are we going to say? But that was all in a conference room watching an opinion come down. So maybe not what you would expect,
No.
but it was the quickest way to be able to digest the information.
Well, the work you're doing is so important and so much appreciated, especially at institutions like Cedarville. So thank you for your service. Thank you for the role you're playing for those prospective students who want to get a Christ-centered education in history, government, or whatever academic program you're interested in. Come visit.
And then I could recommend it more.
What's that?
As somebody who spends time in this space, I couldn't recommend Cedarville more.
There you go. You heard it from a top legal advisor. And come check out cedarville.edu and come for a visit. We'd love to have you. But for now, Randy, I really enjoyed my conversation with you. It was a blast to be with you. And I look forward to seeing you on campus. But for now, thanks for joining me on the Cedarville Stories Podcast. It was great to have you. Thank you for listening to the Cedarville Stories Podcast, brought to you by Cedarville University. Be sure to come back next week when we'll share another Cedarville story for God's glory.